In 2006, Nintendo blessed us with the Nintendo Wii. Everyone and their grandmother, and their grandmother's dog, had one of these things. Seriously, check down the side of your couch cushions. You'll probably find one. So obviously when it came to the next big console, they wanted to capitalize on the Wii's success, and came up with the Wii U. Yeah, you've heard of this thing. Granted, many people might not have realized that it was its own standalone console, rather than a new model of the Wii, but you've still heard of it. I'll preface this video by saying that I've never actually owned one of these for myself. I played on one a fair bit, but it honestly didn't tick enough boxes for me to warrant getting my own, which probably says a lot about the console. I've been a Nintendo fan ever since I got my own DS, the Wii was like a third parent for me, and I absolutely love my Switch. So why did I, like many other people, turn my back to Nintendo during this era? It's already been 10 years since the Wii U released, and I think now is a pretty good time to look into what went wrong. Rather than the Wii U failing for one huge singular reason, it was more like a handful of different reasons that all joined forces, and together they resulted in pretty poor overall sales for the console. The first initial problem came down to its overall marketing. Nintendo were making a very conscious decision by naming it the Wii U. After all, the Wii was ridiculously successful, and had already made its name as the home console for families. The casual market loved it, kids loved it, parents loved it, even grandparents were using this thing. The only group that was slightly left out were the more hardcore gamers, but even then there were a bunch of games that they could easily enjoy. Naming the next console after the first was sure to give it some of the same instantaneous recognition. The only problem was, many people didn't really even see it as its own console. Considering the amount of things that Nintendo named after the Wii, from games to accessories, it doesn't really help the Wii U stand out from the Wii enough as its own entity. So, there was a middle ground that Nintendo probably needed to get into, where it conveyed to people that it was in fact a new console, that did its own stuff and would have its own games, but was a console that had enough similarities to the Wii, where if you enjoyed one, you'd enjoy the other. Now they really didn't help themselves in any of this. The entire marketing campaign was dire at best, especially coming from the Wii era, where the adverts were very spot on and unique to the console. Nintendo had a pretty heavy reliance on things like word of mouth. In their eyes, your friends would somehow get one, and it would be so fun that you'd go home and ask for one too. Now, for where the actual marketing budget went, well, overall lackluster advertisements that, in my opinion, give this overall impression that the Wii U had absolutely no real value. There were a load of ads that were essentially kids coming up with plans to get their parents to buy one, stating reasons like, "We can play Super Mario 3D World." Ah yes, this console plays games, how original. Realistically, they should have been focusing on what the Wii U actually does differently, rather than playing into the Wii nostalgia. Keep Wii in the name, not in the adverts. One thing that really confuses me is why they constantly refer to it as an upgrade. This literally just reinforces the biggest argument against the system, in that, we already have a Wii, why would we need a new one? And overall, it makes it sound like they're pitching the gamepad as an add-on rather than the console on its own. Aside from this, the adverts have become notorious for their uncomfortable and cringe-inducing moments.
Hot buttered popcorn, that's a deal! Yeah.
Seriously, what is this? The one thing I think they did pretty well with the marketing was throwing an emphasis on the amiibos. Finally, something separate and unique from the previous home console. The only issue is, once again the adverts sucked for it. It was just its own narrative and honestly didn't really help make the console or its amiibos look particularly cool. Now looking at the console that came after the Wii U, the Nintendo Switch, we can see that everything was completely flipped on its head. The adverts were showcasing what the system can do, all the settings you could play it in, and had very little focus on the people playing it other than, oh, this guy's going on a plane and can take it with him, or this lady's taking it to a party, which just makes the console look versatile. The Wii U had none of this, and honestly was entirely banking on the Wii to have done most of its marketing for it. I wonder why it sold so poorly. Now, on top of it being marketed badly, the pricing of the Wii U was honestly pretty high. Initially, the base bundle for the Wii U, which came with the console, with 8GB of storage, the gamepad, stylus, and a HDMI cable, was $300. Yeah, I'm having to use dollars because Europe's prices varied a lot. And the deluxe bundle was $350 and came with the console with 32GB storage, gamepad, stylus, HDMI cable, and also a few bonuses like a Nintendo Network Premium subscription, and the game Nintendo Land. Now less than a year later in 2013, Nintendo dropped the price from $350 to $300 for the deluxe bundle in many countries, and for a while following just started throwing out a bunch of different random bundles with all sorts of different games in the deluxe version, and the basic Wii U bundle was discontinued in 2015. I personally don't think the pricing was too awful, but considering that Nintendo have always had to be the cheaper option in the gaming wars, because their consoles simply weren't powerful enough to compete with things like the Xbox or PlayStation, this wasn't a particularly great price. It was a step up from the Wii of either $50 or $100, depending on which you went for, plus the Wii had Wii Sports thrown in from the get-go, which was honestly a pretty huge selling point for a lot of people. I can only imagine seeing the price constantly change and different versions of the console bundles coming out probably didn't instill much confidence in the people buying it, and all of this, plus the piss poor marketing, left it doing fairly poorly. It really didn't help that the PS4 and Xbox One weren't even that much more expensive. On launch, the PS4 was only $400, and the Xbox was $500. How could the Wii U compare with these at its original pricing? The games library on the Wii U was a pretty massive issue in itself. On launch, there were simply not enough games to care about. Yeah, New Super Mario Bros. U is obviously a great game to launch with, but are you going to seriously buy a whole new console for one game? Many of the games were available on other platforms, and honestly, a lot of the time they were best enjoyed somewhere else. Of course, you had some absolute gems like Super Smash Bros., Mario Kart, Pikmin 3, and so on, and honestly, that is great, but my god, we needed more of this stuff and a load of great titles at launch. It really didn't help that Breath of the Wild was delayed so much to the point where it just launched with the Switch instead, and the Wii U version was basically for anyone that couldn't get their hands on the Switch yet. But I mean, come on, some of these games are almost pointless to have on the Wii U. A lot of them are on other platforms already, meaning that if you enjoy the game, you probably already own it. And if you don't already own the game, you might as well play it elsewhere, because who picks the Wii U to play Minecraft? Where else can you play Minecraft? F***ing everywhere. Another big hit that the Wii U took was big name developers deciding that they didn't want to risk it with the console. 2013 saw EA reduce support and focus more on Xbox and PlayStation. Ubisoft refused to make any more exclusives until the sales increased for the console. Bethesda basically saying they weren't going to make any more games due to the hardware of the system, and friggin' Asda taking a stance against it and saying they're not going to stock the console, and would maybe stock a few games if they're good enough. If you want to kill a console, having all the devs back out is a pretty good way of doing it, especially when Nintendo were really holding back on their own first party releases for a long time. It's not that they weren't really releasing games on the system by any means either, just they typically would be available on the DS, which was the option that most people went with, and in many cases would release on the Switch, sometimes with new content, which was my personal choice. Other than this, the console just kinda felt underwhelming. I mean, the HD was great, and I know that some people swear by the gamepad, but for me, everything from the controller battery life, to there just not being enough games on release for a wide audience, just led to it being 10 years of Maybe in 2014 when some of the big boys came onto the scene, like Mario Kart or Smash 4, because hey, I'd play those games religiously. But by that point, game devs had pissed off, most people were looking towards other consoles, and the whole Wii branding with sucky marketing had just confused people. This console could have been great, it could have sold so much better, and hell, give Nintendo a second chance at it with their current knowledge, and the Wii U will be a true Wii successor. It needed a whole rebrand, a price adjustment, a fun little game pack in maybe, advertisements that focused on what the console could do, and all of the amazing games it could play from the get-go, properly commit to the casual audience because they're the people that made the Wii go nuclear, and actually do something with the gamepad. Half of the games barely utilise it, and this is meant to be the big gimmick. Overall, I do honestly think the system could have been just fine. Instead, Nintendo completely dropped the ball on everything surrounding it, making it appeal to such a niche market that it became one of Nintendo's less successful consoles. High cost, bad marketing, a weak launch, and eventually a bad reputation that ended up killing the system, and maybe we never even got to see its full potential, because I feel that Nintendo lost all faith that anything they could make for it could ever do well. Thankfully they learned from their mistakes with the Switch, which basically did the opposite of everything the Wii U did, but damn, it really does suck thinking about such a dull era Nintendo made for themselves after the huge success of the Wii. Damn it, these things are absolutely everywhere.